There is something almost no one notices. Sometimes the greatest sign of strength is not staying, it's leaving. But that contradicts everything you've been taught your entire life. You were taught that strength is insisting, that maturity is enduring, that character is staying, even when everything inside you is already asking you to leave, and maybe that's exactly why you're still stuck. Maybe you've already felt this, the feeling of being in a place that doesn't do you any good, but still staying there, a relationship that drains you, a job that exhausts you, an environment that diminishes you, and even so, you stay. Because leaving feels wrong, because quitting feels like weakness, because you believe that if you just try a little longer, things will get better. But what if I told you that this belief is keeping you exactly where you shouldn't be? Today, we're going to explore 5 brutally honest truths about the power of walking away in silence. Truths that the Stoics were already teaching over 2,000 years ago, and that the Christian faith confirms in an even deeper way. And the last one might make you realize that you were never really trapped, just afraid to walk through the door. Now answer me something. Have you noticed that the more you try to fix something that clearly isn't working, the more you wear yourself down, and the less things change? There is a prison that has no walls. It has no bars, no lock, no one physically holding you, but still, you don't leave. This prison is made of thoughts. I've already invested too much time. It will get better. What will people think of me? I need to be strong. And without realizing it, you turn fear into justification. The Stoics, like Epictetus, already warned about this. You're not trapped by circumstances. You are trapped by the way you interpret them. And here is the first truth no one wants to face. You don't stay because you have to. You stay because you're afraid. Afraid of the unknown, afraid of judgment, afraid of starting over. But there was something you still hadn't realized. The longer you remain in a place that diminishes you, the more you start adapting to less than you deserve. You begin to normalize discomfort, to justify the unjustifiable, to defend what deep down is destroying you. And that's where the danger lies, because when discomfort becomes routine, you stop questioning. And when you stop questioning, you stop growing. But the real lesson is still ahead. Block 2. You think power is having the last word, explaining everything, defending yourself, being understood. But it's not. True power is not needing to explain. It's simply deciding. The Stoics understood this with impressive clarity. Not every battle deserves to be fought. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every relationship deserves continuation. Sometimes, the strongest decision you can make is to withdraw your energy. No announcement, no speech, no confrontation, and that bothers people, because silence creates questions. When you stop insisting, absence begins to teach what your presence never could. And it was at that moment that everything began to change. You realize that the more you try to explain your pain, the more space you give for it to be questioned. You're exaggerating. It's not like that. You never said that before. And suddenly, you are defending the fact that you are hurt. But let me ask you something. Since when do you need permission to respect your own limits? The Christian faith teaches something deep about this. In Proverbs it is written, "Above all else, guard your heart." Guarding your heart also means knowing when to walk away. It means recognizing that not every environment honors who you are. Not every presence builds your life. Not every place deserves your permanence. And here comes the second truth. Not everything you call loyalty is healthy. But that we will explore deeper in the next block. Let me tell you a story. Block 3. It's not about someone specific, but it could easily be about you. Lucas was the kind of person everyone admired, responsible, loyal, always willing to solve problems. He was the one who stayed when everyone else had already left. At first, that seemed like a quality. At work, he took on more tasks than he should. In relationships, he tolerated more than was healthy. In life, he always gave one more chance. And for a while, it worked, or at least, it seemed to. But there was something he still hadn't realized. Every time he ignored his own limit, he moved a little further away from himself. At first, it was just mild tiredness. Then, it became constant exhaustion. But he didn't stop. Because in his mind, there was a silent phrase, "I'm not the type who gives up." And that's when the problem began. Because Lucas wasn't being strong. He was abandoning himself. But the real lesson was still to come. One day, after a particularly exhausting meeting at work, where once again he was disrespected, ignored, and overloaded, he returned home in silence. He sat on the couch, stared into nothing, and for the first time, he didn't try to justify, didn't try to explain, didn't try to rationalize. He just felt, and what he felt was heavy. A mix of frustration, sadness, and something even harder to admit. He realized he was staying in a place where no one really cared to have him. And that hurt. But it wasn't that pain that changed everything. It was the thought that came right after. If I know this, why do I keep staying? And at that moment, something began to break inside him. Not in a negative way, but like an illusion dissolving. For years, Lucas believed that leaving would be failure. But now, for the first time, he began to consider another possibility. What if staying is the real mistake? Block 4. In the days that followed, something curious happened. Nothing changed around him. The job was still the same. The people were still the same. The situations the same. But he began to see everything differently. He started noticing patterns he had ignored before. Constant interruptions, subtle disrespect, demands without recognition. And most importantly, the way he always accepted everything in silence, but not a strong silence. A silence of someone who stays quiet to avoid losing. And that changed, because now his silence began to have a different meaning. It was no longer submission, it was observation, and the more he observed, the more he understood. But there was something he still needed to face. Fear. Not fear of where he was, but fear of what existed outside of it. What if I regret it? What if I don't find something better? What if I'm overreacting? These questions started to arise strongly. And for a moment, he almost went back, almost convinced himself that everything was fine, almost returned to his old pattern, but something inside him didn't allow it. Maybe because deep down, he already knew. You can't unsee what you've already seen. And he had seen it. So, on an ordinary day, no announcement, no drama, no big speech, he made a decision. He didn't over-explain, didn't try to convince anyone, didn't make a scene, he simply left. And the most curious part? No one tried to stop him. Some even seemed surprised, others indifferent. And that, in a way, confirmed everything. All this time, he had been fighting to stay in a place that never fought to keep him. Block 5. But the most important part came after. In the following days, silence. Without that environment, without that pressure, without that constant need to prove his worth, and for the first time in a long time, peace, not explosive happiness, but something deeper, light, stable, silent. And it was at that moment that everything made sense. Lucas realized he hadn't lost anything. In fact, he had recovered something he didn't even know he had lost, himself. And here is the central point of this story. Lucas didn't change the world around him. He didn't make anyone realize their mistake. He didn't have an external victory, but he did something far more powerful. He changed his own decision, and that changed everything, because in the end, Power was not in convincing others. It was in no longer needing them to validate his staying. And maybe this story is closer to your reality than you'd like to admit. But there's still something essential to understand. Why is this so difficult? Why, even knowing, even feeling, even realizing? Do you still stay? That's what we're going to reveal now. Block 6. There is a reason why leaving feels so difficult. And it's not lack of strength, it's lack of clarity. Because deep down, you've been conditioned to believe in certain ideas that seem noble, but in practice, they imprison you. And the first one is this: staying is a sign of character. But let me show you something the Stoics already understood centuries ago. Character is not about how much you endure, it's about what you accept. Epictetus taught that human suffering does not come from events, but from how we interpret those events. And here is the mistaken interpretation. You believe that enduring something that hurts you makes you strong, but in reality, it may just be making you accustomed. And there is a huge difference between those two things, but there was something you still hadn't realized. Every time you remain in an environment that wounds your peace, you send a silent message to yourself. This is acceptable. And over time, your mind starts to believe it. That's how patterns are formed. That's how incredible people begin to doubt their own worth. That's how you slowly disconnect from who you truly are. But the real turning point happens when you understand this. You don't need to be understood to make a healthy decision. Most people get stuck exactly here. They want to leave, but feel they need to explain. They want to step away, but feel they need to justify. They want to change, but feel they need someone's approval. And this creates an emotional trap, because the more you explain, the more space you open for negotiation. And those who don't want to lose you, but also don't want to change, will use your words against you. You're exaggerating. It's not like that. Let's try one more time. And suddenly, you are convincing yourself to stay. But here is the point that changes everything. Decision is not a debate. Decision is positioning. Marcus Aurelius constantly wrote about the importance of protecting your own mind. Because according to him, you may not control what happens outside, but you can always choose how you respond. And sometimes, the wisest response is not to react, it's to withdraw. Block 7. But now comes something even deeper, something that Stoicism explains, but the Christian faith completes. The Bible does not only teach endurance, it teaches discernment. In 1 Corinthians, there is a powerful principle. Bad company corrupts good character. This is not about judgment. It's about awareness. Not every environment builds you. Not every relationship strengthens you. Not every connection comes from God. And when you remain where there is constant wear, you are not being faithful. You may just be moving away from your purpose. But there was something even harder to accept. You are not trapped. You are afraid. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of making a mistake. And this fear disguises itself. It calls itself loyalty. It calls itself responsibility. It calls itself patience. But deep down, it is just resistance to change. And this is where Stoicism and faith meet perfectly. Stoicism says, you control your choices. Christian faith says, trust God with what you don't control. In other words, you take the step, and God takes care of the path. But most people try to do the opposite. They want to control the outcome before making the decision. And that paralyzes. Because you will never have complete guarantees, never have absolute certainty, never have all the answers. But let me tell you something very clearly. Clarity does not come before the decision. It comes after. Lucas only found peace after he left. You will only fully understand and after you take a stand. And it was at that moment that everything began to make sense. Leaving is not rejecting the other. It is choosing yourself. It is not giving up on life. It is refusing to live below what God prepared for you. And here is the truth that transforms everything. If a place requires you to shrink to fit, that place was not made for you. And staying there is not humility. It is disconnection. Block 8. But the most important part is still missing. How do you do this in practice? How do you leave? Without guilt, without fear, without losing yourself in the process. That's what we're going to build now. Now that you understand all of this, the most important question arises. How, in practice, do you find the strength to leave? Because understanding is not the hard part. The hard part is acting, especially when there is attachment, history, memory, emotion involved. But here is something you need to hold on to. Leaving does not start with an external step. It starts with an internal decision. And there are 3 practical attitudes that can help you in this process. First attitude, strategic silence. You don't need to announce your departure. You don't need to explain everything. You don't need to convince anyone. In fact, the more you talk, the more you confuse yourself. The Stoics knew this. They practiced internal mastery before external action, and silence is not weakness. It is clarity being built. When you stop arguing, you begin to see. When you stop justifying, you begin to position yourself. And here's something deep. Jesus, in many moments, chose silence in the face of accusations, not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't need to prove anything. That teaches something powerful. Not every situation requires your voice. Some only require your decision. Block 9. Second attitude, redefine loyalty. You need to ask an honest question. Am I being loyal, or am I abandoning myself? Because loyalty without limits becomes self-destruction. Seneca said that suffering before it is necessary is suffering more than necessary. And that is exactly what happens when you remain in something that has already ended. But you refuse to accept it. The Christian faith complements this directly. God does not call you to live in constant emotional exhaustion. He calls you to live with purpose and also with peace. If to remain, you have to lose your peace. Maybe that staying does not come from God, and that changes everything. Third attitude, trust the process, even without guarantees. This may be the hardest one, because it requires faith, and not just religious faith, but real trust. Trust that, even without knowing exactly what comes next, leaving is still the right choice. Proverbs says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." That means you don't need to have all the answers to take the next step. You only need enough clarity to not continue where you are. And here is the key point. God guides paths, but you need to take the step. Block 10. But now, let me invite you to a deep reflection. Pause for a moment and answer honestly. Is there any place in your life where you already know you should have left, but you're still there? Maybe it's a relationship, maybe an environment, maybe a pattern, and deep down, you already know, you've already felt it, you've already realized it, but you haven't decided yet, and that's okay. Because awareness comes before courage, but courage must come. Challenge for the next 7 days. Observe your life carefully, without judgment, without denial, and identify where you are staying out of fear and not out of purpose. And then do something simple, but powerful. Stop insisting. You don't need to leave immediately, but stop forcing, stop justifying, stop negotiating your peace, and observe what this changes inside you. If this topic touched you deeply, there is a book that can help you a lot. the courage to be disliked. It teaches in a practical way how to stop living based on others' approval and start living with emotional freedom. If you want to go deeper and understand better, I suggest it to you. This book is amazing. The link is pinned in the comments. And now tell me, which of these truths impacted you the most? Which one do you realize you need to apply in your life right now? Write in the comments. My presence is a choice, not an obligation. Not as a pretty phrase, but as a position. If this content helped you see something you hadn't noticed before, stay here, subscribe to the channel, and keep walking this process of strengthening your mind and aligning your life with God. Because in the end, sometimes the greatest act of courage is not fighting, it is simply walking away with dignity.